My family told everyone I failed. I sat quietly at my brother's engagement dinner. Then his fiancée looked at me and whispered, "Wait, you're—" The room froze. Even my mother couldn't speak. My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've felt like a background character in my own family. I grew up in a household where excellence wasn't just encouraged. It was demanded, defined, and handed out in neat, predetermined boxes. My parents both came from long lines of overachievers. My father is a neurosurgeon who still quotes journal articles at dinner. My mother, a partner at a prestigious law firm, never once missed a board meeting or a chance to correct my grammar. In our house, success had a uniform. It wore a white coat or a courtroom suit, carried Ivy League diplomas, and spoke in published papers and job titles people recognised. Then there was my brother Daniel, the golden boy. He played varsity soccer-led student council interned at research labs in high school and of course got into Stanford's pre-med program without breaking a sweat. At every holiday, every family reunion, his achievements were retold like legends. And me, I was the pause between topics. The subject they handled with polite vagueness. I loved stories, design, and systems that connected people in ways they didn't expect. But when I tried to share that, it felt like tossing pebbles into a storm. My parents listened with the same expression you might give a child explaining how they will fly by flapping their arms. I wasn't rebelling, I just saw the world differently. But in a family like mine, different meant disappointing. Growing up, the dinner table felt more like a performance review than a meal. My brother would describe a complicated surgery he shadowed, or some conference paper he co-authored, and my parents would lean in with beaming eyes. Then they'd turn to me, not unkindly, but like I was a riddle they couldn't solve. "And you, Lauren, are you still doing your computer stuff?" They never said it with malice, but that was almost worse. It wasn't rejection, it was dismissal, subtle and steady like a faucet drip that shapes stone over time. I started to speak less, share less. It wasn't worth the blank stares or the subtle sighs. I'd say I was working on a new project and they'd nod, then ask Daniel how his residency interviews were going. At school, I wasn't failing. I was thriving in my own way. I built a school-wide communication app in 10th grade, which ended up being used by 3 other schools in the district. I got accepted into a top technology institute on a full scholarship. None of that made it into the family Christmas letter. Apparently, accomplishments needed Latin honours to be worth noting. By the time I turned 25, I'd stopped inviting my parents to demo days or pitch competitions. It wasn't anger that kept me quiet, it was self-preservation. Each time they brushed off what I was building, it chipped away at the part of me that still wanted to be seen by them. Eventually, I realised I didn't need their eyes on me to exist. I just had to keep going. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. I watched them fly across the country for Daniel's white coat ceremony, throwing a party afterward with custom-printed napkins and monogrammed cupcakes. The same week, I signed my first 5-figure client contract. I didn't tell anyone. I just ordered myself takeout and went back to work. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who love you but don't respect you. It's not loud, it doesn't explode. It settles quietly like dust on your shoulders. You start to wonder if maybe you are the odd one out the misstep in a family of precise choreography. And yet, something in me refused to sit still. Even when they couldn't see it, I did. I saw the seeds of something real in what I was building. I held on to that. Not out of defiance, but because deep down I believed that one day what I created would speak loud enough to be heard even in the rooms where I'd always been invisible. It happened the week I won the State Tech Innovation Challenge. I'd stayed up for nights coding an AI-powered scheduling system for community health centres. My classmates cheered when they announced my name, and a local startup founder even handed me his card after the ceremony, saying he saw real potential. When I got home still holding the glass award, The house was already full. My parents were hosting a dinner party for Daniel, who had just been accepted into a top-tier surgical residency. They had champagne-catered appetizers and a slideshow of his achievements playing on loop. No one noticed when I walked in. No one asked where I'd been. I slipped the award onto the back shelf of my closet and didn't mention it. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I knew they wouldn't understand. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the voices from the party still echoing downstairs. I remember thinking, this is how it's always going to be. If I want to be seen, I'll have to build something so undeniable it speaks for itself. That was the moment I stopped chasing their attention. I made a quiet vow to myself. I would make something real, something that mattered, and I wouldn't wait for their approval to do it. Choosing a college was the first act of rebellion. My parents had planned on me going into law. They even arranged an alumni dinner with a Harvard admissions counselor. Instead, I accepted a scholarship to a mid-sized tech institute in Portland. It wasn't flashy, but it had one of the most hands-on computer science programs in the country. More importantly, it felt like mine. Away from home, I could breathe. For the first time, I wasn't the disappointment in a sea of perfection. I was just Lauren, a girl who loved building things. I buried myself in code and design, not for grades, but because I couldn't not. It was like finally speaking a language I'd only ever whispered before. During my second year, I met Maya. She sat next to me in an advanced algorithms class and leaned over to ask if I thought the professor knew he was wrong about the heap sort runtime. I laughed, and just like that, we were inseparable. She was brilliant, relentless, and every bit as fed up with the idea of climbing someone else's ladder. We started staying up late in the student lounge, sketching ideas, tearing them down, building again. One night, Maya told me about her grandmother who had passed away after a prescription error during a hospital transfer. I told her about my cousin being misdiagnosed twice before they caught her cancer. That night, between vending machine snacks and half-drunk coffee, we started mapping out an idea. A clean, intuitive platform that would fix the messy, outdated way hospitals communicated. We called it PatchLink, and even then, it felt like more than a project. We didn't have money or connections, but we had time, hunger, and belief. We started small. A prototype was coded in bursts between classes, a borrowed conference room to pitch to a local clinic. When that first clinic said yes, we cried in the stairwell, then got right back to work. I didn't tell my parents. They thought I was tutoring part-time to make ends meet. Letting them believe that felt easier than hearing another lecture about fallback careers or how tech was too unstable. I told myself that, when it worked, I'd tell them. But deep down, I already knew this was no longer about proving anything to them. This was about proving something to myself. That shift changed everything. I no longer waited to be invited into the room. I built my own door, and with every line of code, every late night, Maya and I spent debugging features and pitching to skeptical administrators. I felt a little less like the invisible girl and a little more like the woman I was becoming, one they might never fully understand, but one I was finally proud of. We started in a garage that smelled like dust coffee and old cardboard. Maya's parents had converted the space into a half-storage, half-studio mess, but to us it was a launch pad. We hauled in a folding table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a whiteboard that always tilted slightly to the left. Most nights we worked until our eyes blurred. We survived on pad thai and cold pizza, ordering from the same 3 places, because they didn't mind delivering to the alley entrance. Our Wi-Fi came from the neighbours. Maya had convinced them it was for her thesis, and slipped them $20 for the password. Those early days were held together by adrenaline and belief. We built the first real prototype over a long weekend, sleeping in shifts, rewriting code between takeout containers and tangled extension cords. Sometimes we get stuck, sometimes we fought, but we always came back to the same question. What if this actually works? Money was tight. I picked up side gigs doing UX audits and freelance bug fixes. Maya taught high school kids to code in the afternoons. We made just enough to buy groceries and pay utilities. When we couldn't cover rent one month, we offered to redesign our landlord's antique shop website. He agreed. We delivered it in 3 days and he gave us another month free. I still hadn't told my parents. They thought I was working IT support at a startup. I didn't correct them. It wasn't shameful. It was a strategy. I didn't want to explain why we were sharing a garage with folding chairs, or why my biggest victory that month was getting a bug-free beta version to run. Inside our tiny bubble, it all felt big. Every milestone, a new test feature, a clinic replying to our cold email, a medical advisor asking for a second meeting, felt like proof we weren't crazy. We weren't just building software. We were building proof that 2 young women with no family backing no VC pipeline and no blueprint could still matter. There were nights I slept in my clothes, head on my backpack, hands still sticky from ramen noodles. And yet, I was more alive than I had ever been under my parents' roof. I didn't need applause, I needed momentum. And we had it, even if no one else could see it yet. Looking back, we had no real safety net. Just a stubborn belief that what we were doing was worth the hunger, the fatigue, the long hours no one clapped for. That belief wasn't loud, but it was constant. And sometimes that's all you need to keep going. By the time our software had rolled out to its 20th clinic, we could barely keep up with the momentum. A regional healthcare provider signed on next, followed by a teaching hospital in Denver. Word spread through a quiet mix of administrator networks and doctor forums, and suddenly we were getting more calls than we could answer. We hired a back-end wizard named Theo, a dropout from my tea who coded like he was solving puzzles in his sleep. Then came Ava, a designer who made everything we built feel clean, human, and alive. The team grew, the platform stabilized, and so did our impact. We raised our first seed round from an angel investor who said he'd been waiting 10 years to fund a team like ours. We moved into a real office, a cramped space above a bagel shop with flickering lights and terrible insulation, but it was ours. Every milestone felt surreal. I kept waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say it was too good to be true. But through it all, my family still thought I was doing some kind of freelance IT work. My mum once asked if I'd considered applying for an admin job at a health tech company. She said it would give me benefits and maybe a clearer path. I just smiled and said I'd think about it. At holidays, my dad would ask if I was still playing with apps. He said it like it was a phase, like I was still doodling in the margins of what counted as real. Meanwhile, we had passed 100 hospitals. Our client list stretched across 6 states. But I stopped trying to make them understand. Part of me wanted to tell them everything, to walk them through the dashboards, the security protocols, the testimonials, from doctors who said we'd saved hours or even lives. But a bigger part knew what their faces would look like. Blank, confused, disbelieving. That silence hurt more than any argument. So I kept my wins close, like secret postcards I mailed to myself. When we crossed $1 million in revenue, I bought a pair of boots I'd been eyeing for years. When we hit our 100th hospital, Maya and I split a bottle of champagne on the rooftop of our building. We toasted to grit, to code to the long road behind, and the longer one ahead. It was pride, absolutely, but also grief. Grief that the people who raised me couldn't see the value in what I was pouring my life into. I didn't need their applause anymore. But there were moments, quiet ones, where I wished I could just say it out loud, that I had built something, that it mattered, and that even if they couldn't see it, I was no longer invisible, not to the world, and most importantly, not to myself. The restaurant was sleek and glassy, filled with the low hum of polite laughter and clinking silverware. My parents had chosen it carefully, one of those downtown spots where the wine list came on an iPad and the lighting made everyone look a little more important. I arrived on time wearing a black dress I'd chosen not to impress, but to feel grounded, to remind myself that I belonged whether they saw it or not. Daniel greeted me first ever, the charming host pulling me into a side hug before steering me toward the long table filled with extended family and friends. Harper was standing at the far end, poised and radiant, the kind of woman my mother had always dreamed I'd become friends with. She smiled warmly when we shook hands, asking the usual questions with practiced grace. Dinner moved in slow, elegant courses. Toasts were given. My father praised Daniel's latest publication. My mother recounted his middle school science fair, like it had saved humanity. I sat between a cousin who asked if I was still doing that coding thing, and an uncle who mentioned a receptionist job opening at a biotech firm. I nodded, smiled, and kept my voice even. Somewhere between the second course and dessert, Harper looked across the table and squinted slightly, her brows pulling together. Her voice cut across the clinking glasses. Wait, Langford. Your name's Lauren Langford. She looked directly at me now. Are you the founder of Metava? The air in the room stilled, like someone had pulled a plug. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. My mother blinked twice. My father lowered his glass without taking a sip. I met Harper's gaze and said yes. I am. Her voice rose a pitch clear and incredulous. You're the founder of Metava. Has the company Horizon been in talks with for months? My brother, suddenly pale, turned to her. That can't be right. My sister works in tech, like help desk stuff. Harper didn't look away from me. No, your sister is the CEO of the most secure clinical communications platform on the market. Our analysts call it category defining. Silence settled like fog. Then slowly heads turned. My mother gripped her necklace, as if it could anchor her. My father stared like I was someone new. My cousin whispered something to his wife. I held my posture, breathed slowly, and kept my face calm, even as my hands trembled under the table. Daniel was still frozen, processing. Is that true? He asked, his voice lower. I nodded. We started in a garage. Now we serve over 100 hospitals. We're not looking to sell, but we're listening. No one spoke. No one even touched their dessert. For years, I'd imagined this moment being seen, finally, undeniably. But standing in the centre of it, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired of waiting for this to matter to them, tired of needing their faces to light up so I could feel full. Still, I let them sit with it, the weight of what they had missed. The woman they thought they understood, now unfamiliar, holding more power and purpose than they had ever acknowledged. And in that moment, I realised something quietly life-changing. I didn't need their validation anymore. But it was still something to behold when it finally arrived, even if it came 10 years late and 3 startups behind. The rest of dinner blurred into small talk and awkward glances. My relatives, who used to skim past me like background noise, now leaned in to ask about venture rounds and app interfaces. My mum mentioned 3 times that she always knew I was good with computers. My dad nodded so hard during Harper's praise that you'd think he'd coached me through every pitch. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything close to what I thought I would when I used to fantasize about this moment. The truth was, the applause sounded hollow when it came, after a silence that had lasted for years. Harper pulled me aside after dessert near the wide glass windows overlooking the river. Her tone was gentle, almost cautious, as she apologized for putting me on the spot. I shook my head. It was inevitable. That moment was always going to come. She looked at me for a long second before speaking again. She told me their analysts had been obsessed with our user data. The tech team at Horizon kept calling our platform one of the cleanest builds they'd ever seen. She said she understood now why we were so protective, and that what we had made wasn't just valuable. It was vital. It hit me differently coming from her. Maybe because she didn't carry the weight of all those dismissed report cards or the condescending smiles over Sunday dinner. She saw me just as I was, not as a daughter to correct or a sister to outshine, but as a builder, a peer. I thanked her. Not because I needed to, but because I meant it. There was something healing in hearing it from someone who didn't owe me anything, someone who just saw the work and respected it. Walking to my car that night, I didn't look back at the restaurant. I used to think recognition would be the finish line, that if I could just get them to finally see me, the ache inside would quiet down. But the truth was, the ache had already softened long before they caught up. Years of building, failing, learning, and starting again had already reshaped me. I didn't build Metava to prove anything. I built it because the problem was real, and I couldn't let it stay broken. Somewhere along the way, my reasons had changed, and that had changed me too. As I pulled out of the parking garage, I felt something close to peace. Not pride, not anger, just a calm certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. They had finally seen me, but I had already seen myself a long time ago, and that made all the difference. They were already seated when I walked into the hotel dining room dressed like they were heading to a board meeting. My mother wore pearls, her blouse pressed sharp, and my father had on the blazer he saved for conference presentations. They both stood when I approached, their smiles polite, a little too careful. The waiter came quickly, giving us menus none of us needed. We ordered coffee and something small to eat, but the food didn't matter. My mother leaned forward first, her voice soft. She said she'd been reading about the funding rounds, the hospital rollouts, and the press coverage. Then she asked the question that hovered between us. "Why didn't you tell us?" I folded my napkin. Slowly gave myself a second. Because the last time I tried, I said quietly, "You told me to apply for a job answering phones." My father shifted in his seat. He said that wasn't fair, they were just trying to help. I looked him in the eye and replied, "You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken." My mother's smile faltered. She said they didn't understand. The world I chose felt unstable. Tech seemed risky. I nodded. "That's what scared you. I picked something you couldn't define, so you dismissed it. And in doing so, you dismissed me." They didn't argue this time. My dad let out a long breath like something heavy was loosening in his chest. My mum looked down at her coffee. "We thought you were lost," she said. "I wasn't," I answered. "I just wasn't yours to direct anymore." There was a pause. Not awkward, just fragile like the space between old floorboards settling. Then my father said he'd started reading more about startups, that he was proud, that maybe they'd misunderstood what success could look like. My mother nodded, said she hadn't realised how much she'd boxed me in. The rest of the brunch passed with less formality. They asked about Maya, about the early days in the garage, what it felt like when we signed our first big client. My mum admitted she'd tried reading a blog about SaaS models, but got lost halfway through. We laughed, and for the first time in years, it felt real. When the check came, no one rushed to leave. We sat there holding on to the quiet. It wasn't a sweeping reconciliation, no teary speeches, but it was honest. They finally saw I wasn't broken, just different. And maybe that was never something to fix in the first place. It was a start. And that was enough. It was late when he showed up. I heard the knock before I saw his face through the peephole, holding a bottle of red wine in one hand and a bakery box in the other. He looked sheepish, like the kid who used to sneak cookies from the jar and ask me not to tell. I opened the door and just stared for a second before stepping aside. He didn't say anything right away, just handed me the wine, then the box. I tried baking. It went badly, so I bought backups. We sat on the living room floor, backs against the couch like we used to do after family dinners. The skyline glowed through my window, soft and distant. He opened the wine, poured 2 glasses, and handed me one without a word. "I need to say something," he said finally. I waited. He took a sip, then looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen in years. "I'm sorry. I believed what Mum and Dad believed, that you were lost, that you missed the mark." He set his glass down. "But you weren't lost. You were building something we didn't understand. And I never asked. I didn't see you because I didn't know how to look. I felt something unstick in my chest, like a door, long rusted, finally swinging open. You weren't the only one," I said. "But you're the only one here now. That counts." We sat there a while, letting the silence do its work. Then he raised his glass again, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. "To the black sheep." I laughed, clinking mine against his. "To the sheep who built an empire." We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. The room felt full in a way it hadn't before. Not with answers, but with something truer. A shared understanding built not on pride or guilt, but on something quieter. Recognition. That night mattered more to me than any article, any funding, round any headline. Because for the first time, he didn't just admire me. He saw me. And after all the years of silence, that was enough. Maybe even more than enough. Looking back, I used to think recognition was the goal. That if I could just get them to see me to understand what I had built, it would finally feel like enough. But the truth is that moment only mattered because I had already done the work of believing in myself first. There is power in building alone, in choosing to move forward when no one is watching, when no one claps, when the only voice telling you to keep going is your own. That kind of conviction doesn't fade when the applause ends. It holds you up when everything else feels uncertain. Recognition is sweet, but self-trust, hard-earned and quietly kept, is what carries you through. So let me ask you something. Have you ever built something no one believed in, and did you keep building it anyway?